I want to take a little bit of time to introduce folks who don't know much about me other than the little bit that they read perhaps on Facebook or Twitter, uh, or have been a part of the Bible Forum's message board over the years, or from places past. I I've been a minister of the gospel. I started out even back as young as when I was 14 years old, called to preach the gospel at a youth camp when I was a young boy. Verified and confirmed that same exact night when my father asked me, "How did you know you were called? How do you know you were called? How do you know it was God?" And I says, "Well, I don't know how to answer that to you, just other than to tell you I know it was, but if somebody will confirm it tonight because he told me that would happen." And my dad thought, well, no harm, no foul there. He told me, don't say nothing. No. And while he was talking to me, a preacher from Montana came to me, came up to us, and he said, "Ken, he said, Pastor Smith," he said, I'm supposed to, the Lord told me that I'm supposed to have Ken come to my church and do a revival for 3 nights. And he said, I don't know, this was in Big Timber, Montana, I'll never forget it. And he said, I don't know why, but that's what the Lord's impressed on my dad just looked at me. He says, well, I guess there's your confirmation. A few months later, I went and preached my first 3 days gathering, and I preached all over the place. I preached all over the state and other states. I sang everywhere. Spoke at a few of the youth conferences there in Montana. Singing was the biggest thing that I did. We had many various state competitions. I sang with teen talent at the Church of God General Assembly meetings. That would have been, I think it was 1978, in Kansas City, Kansas, at the Democratic Convention Center there. I remember that, and it was after that when I pretty much had just got fed up with a lot of things, fed up with hypocrisy, fed up with accusations made that but because I was a preacher's kid, I must be punished. I fed up with the people, what I saw as hatred even in the church. I was fed up with all of this stuff. So when it came down to it, and I became angry, bitter. But it was 1 year at youth camp. Again, at youth camp, 2 major things happened in my life at youth camp. One, I was called into the ministry at youth camp, and a few years later, this is what happened. I went to we had the sermons. They had the services every evening, and it was full of kids, teenage kids, and even some smaller ones. But we gathered together every night, and we had the service, and we had some wonderful services. I don't remember who the preacher was, and certainly all these years later, I don't even remember what the message was. But I remember after one of the services, they were having the altar service, and kids were all up there and praying, and I noticed one of the girls sitting over there who was a fellow preacher's kid. Her dad pastored a church. I won't call the city because that's not relevant, and there would be no sense in it because people might know who she is, and I don't know how much she's told this testimony over the years, but she something was out of place with her. She was a very beautiful girl. She was kind of an attraction to me in the sense that I was the kind of kid that I was very outgoing. I was athletic. I played sports, and I was good at it, and was one of the what they would call in school. I was considered a jock. Scored a lot of touchdowns and whatnot like that, and so I was the jock, and as well as I stayed pure during that time. I didn't go partying and doing all the stuff. I wasn't sleeping with everybody that would hold still and all that, and so even within the church, and then I was the I was preaching and singing and this, that, and the other. So I never had a problem with a girlfriend and having a girlfriend and somebody to go to the Friday night banquet with at the youth camp or Saturday, whatever that was, and never had a problem with anything like that. But this was the one girl who never would. So of course I was fascinated with that. It wasn't that she was rude or unkind; she just never would. And so and I made the attempt a time or two, but it wasn't that she ever said no. She just never let herself be. She would always cut me off before I could even ask, and so I found that fascinating with her. But we became very good friends, and in the process of all of that, and we I saw her over there, and I went over there and I took her by the hand, and I held her hand, and I asked her, was she okay? Because she just didn't look right. Something looked really bad. I couldn't tell if she was sick or what, but I asked her, was she okay? And she just turned her head and looked at me. And then her hands squeezed my hands together. And but she didn't say nothing. And I'm like, are you okay? And it was then I realized, hey, you're hurting my hand. I mean, she was squeezing them so hard. And she was a little thing too. She wasn't big. And she was squeezing my hands so hard that it was physically hurting, and I start talking to her, and I said, do you want me to pray with you? And then she turned around and she said, F you, very clearly. But it didn't sound like her. And I couldn't tap somebody on the shoulder because she had both of my hands, but I took my foot, stretched it out as far as I could, and I tapped one of the kids that was down there kneeling on his back. And when he looked up to me, I said, come here. And he came over there, and I said, go get one of the preachers and tell them to come here now. I didn't know for sure, but I had a sneaking suspicion that this was really bad. And so I because she wasn't even looking at me with normal eyes. I can't even explain it hardly. It was like looking through me, looking in me, looking past me. I don't know how to explain it. It just wasn't right. And so he went and got one of the preachers, and when they finally got over there, by this time she was starting to do some really freaky things. There was some freaky stuff happening here. Her feet had her toes were folded up against her shins. I mean, her foot just buckled up on both of her legs, her feet buckled up, and her toes were literally laying flat across her shins. Well, this is physically impossible. Even if you were double jointed, you're not doing that. And me being me, and I didn't have a clue. I've seen demonic possession before. I had an idea, maybe this is what this is here, but I wasn't certain, and I was kind of freaked out. Fascinated too, I ain't gonna lie, but freaked out. And the preacher come over, he took one look, and he said, I'll be back. And he went, talked with the state overseer, and he talked with a couple of the state youth director, and the next thing you know, they're clearing every kid in that. They stop everything, and they're clearing everybody out of that place. They get all of the kids out of there. They get all of everybody out of there except for the preachers, and the preachers are all congregating, and they come over there, and they're standing around, and they're looking, and I can't go nowhere. She's got my hand, and she's got it in a grip. We can't get it couldn't get it loose. Some of them tried to help pry my hands loose, but we couldn't. So I was going to be there for the duration of this, and so we're sitting there. I'm sitting on the pew with her on the bench in the chapel, and they're all standing around praying. All of a sudden, they start praying and they start rebuking the demons in her, and there's a stench coming from her. I told you about her feet already, and her body is making some kind of crackling noises. Every time she moved, it was like everything cracked, and I mean, and it was an intensely loud cracking noise. She turned her head, it cracked. She moved her arms or her legs, and it cracked. And her hands, the strength in her hands was remarkable, because I could not get free from her, and I mean, my fingers are starting, the tip of my fingers are starting to turn purple now, but the freak out's gone now, because now I'm fascinated with the whole thing. All these preachers are praying for her, and and some of them are just standing off to the side praying while somebody's right there in front of her praying and rebuking the devil and rebuking the demons and trying to get the demons to say who they were. I mean, they were trying everything and speaking in tongues. There'd be several over to the side just speaking in tongues, and the preacher talking to her would be talking normal, and she would say some stuff every now and again. It wasn't very nice. I will not repeat it. And then every now and again she'd look at a preacher and she'd start to read his mail, and it wasn't oftentimes very pretty. And while they never admitted that she read their mail right, I could tell by the look on several of their faces that she probably hit slap dab in the bullseye. And of course, those were the preachers that no longer just stood by the wayside. They kind of meandered over to the other side of the church. They didn't want to be anywhere near her anymore. And then you've got them getting frustrated now because time has passed, and this thing isn't going nowhere, and they're praying and they're speaking in tongues. The stink that was coming out of her body was nauseating. She was ugly now, and her mouth was foul. It was not her voice. There's no way this young girl was. She was fairly small. She was very thin. She was beautiful, but this was a voice that she couldn't in no way mimic. This was not something that she could do, especially for any amount of time. And this thing wouldn't shut up. It got to the point where it was just rubbing it back in their faces. They had no power over this, and that was becoming evident. And the more fascinated I became, my fascination turned to why wasn't this responding to them? I mean, here you had all the preachers up there, and they're commanding this thing to leave, and it would laugh at them. They were commanding it in the name of Jesus, and nothing was happening. They were doing this, and they were doing that. They were speaking, nothing was happening. She was reading their mail, and I knew she hit home with a few of them, and they were running off, and so all this was happening, but nothing was happening with the demon that was in this girl, and then my fascination turned into kind of aggravation, because I was aggravated at them. Why weren't they getting this done? Because my hand was really hurting. My tips are really purple now, and it's hurting, and I had to go to the bathroom really, really bad. and nothing was happening, and I couldn't. I'm trying to kind of, because I'm sweating. My hands are sweating like a pig, and I'm trying to pull my fingers out, but they wouldn't budge. She just had a grip on them that was unreal, and I finally told them all to shut up. Everybody just shut up. And you could have heard a pin drop in that little sanctuary. And I just sat there, and I just looked at all these people, and I'm like, why? And I finally just turned around and I looked at her. And I said, I called her by her name. And I said, I love you. And then I said, whatever you are in this girl, in the name of Jesus, leave her now. She fell to the floor. Just fell to the floor. She just became a doll rag. And she fell to the floor. And her feet were normal again. Her bones didn't crack, her body didn't creak and crack, and when she spoke, it was her. And she just said my name, Ken, and then she started to cry. And she'd let go of my hand. Thank God, my fingers were, the blood was coming into my fingers. That was tingling and hurting so bad. But I reached down and I rubbed her head, and I said, "You're okay. I love you, and you're okay." And it left, which fascinated me even more. Uh, I did believe when I said for it to come out that I had the authority to do that, and I believed that I had the ability to do that. Once I had got over the fascination and perhaps even the kind of fear, the freak out anyway, um, I was no longer concerned about whether I had the ability, the authority through Christ to do that. I knew I did, and I exercised that. What fascinated me is why it wasn't happening with the other guys. I'm not going to lie. Well, they had told me to go on, and they were going to get her, take care of her. They were going to have some of the women come in and take her and be with her and help clean her up, because she had soiled herself. She had both pooped and peed herself during this time, and they were going to clean all that up, and they asked me to go up to one of the cabins, an empty cabin. It wasn't one of the cabins. It wasn't one of the dormitories where the kids mostly stayed. I wasn't going back to my dorm. They wanted me to go stay in one of the cabins where, parents would come. They could stay at the cabin, rent the cabin and stay there. And they had one empty, and they had me go up there and sit in the cabin. They wanted me to wait for till the state overseer was going to come talk to me. So I go up to the cabin, and I'm standing at the cabin, and they locked me in. They used a padlock on the outside of the door, and they locked me in. The door's locked from the inside. I mean, like a normal, door, but because it was out in the middle of the Yellowstone Park, they had, hasp blocks that they would lock on the outside when nobody was using the facility, and they took that thing and closed it up with me inside, and I'm like, rattling the door, and there was somebody out there, and one of the other pastors, and he said, "Ken, they'll be with you. He'll be up. I won't call his name either, but brother so and so, he'll be up here in a little bit. He just wants to talk to you." I says, "Well, then why do you got to lock me in here?" "Well, we just don't want you to go nowhere." "Well, I'm not going to go nowhere. Open the door." But they wouldn't open the door. And it was a little while later when the state overseer came into the cabin, and he said, "Well, that was pretty interesting, wasn't it?" And I said, "That it certainly was." And he said, "Well, what do you think that was?" And I just looked at him. And the only thing at that point in time, and I've always had a little bit of a streak in me, and the only thing I could think to say was, "Don't you kind of think that was rather obvious?" And he goes, "Yeah, well, what did you think it was?" And I said, "She was possessed." And he looked at me, he goes, No, she wasn't possessed." And I said, "Well, then, what are you going to tell me it was?" Because I wouldn't ask him what he think it was. I know he knew what it was. I said, "Well, what are you going to tell me it was?" Well, in her past, she's experimented with acid, with drugs, and acid was one of them, and she was just having a flashback. And I said, "You know what? It's the 70s. I'm not surprised that she's experimented with drugs. Most kids have. Especially most teenagers by then had, And I said, but I really don't think, not that I'm an expert on it, but I don't think flashbacks work exactly that way. I mean, perhaps your mind can do some crazy stuff and you can see some crazy things, but I kind of figure, drug flashbacks don't cause your toes to lay up against your feet to buckle and your toes to lay up against your shins flat. I don't think flashbacks cause a stench to come out of your body that's grow. I don't think flashbacks cause your voice to change to the point to where it can't possibly be that girl. I don't think it was a flashback. It was a flashback and leave it be. And I'm like, all right. He said, this will not be talked about to the kids, to the adults, to nobody. This will not be talked about. And I'm like, yeah, okay, not a problem. Which was not the truth, but I just want to get out of there by this point in time. But he said, no, you're going to have to stay in here now until you go home. And we still had 2 days left of youth camp. And I said, stay in here in the cabin? They said, yes. I said, well, you call my dad. Because this was the first year we'd been in the state that my dad hadn't gone to youth camp. He was pastor in the church in the town we were at, but also, there was my dad by trade, and he's always done it to supplement income if he needed to. Around Christmas time, he would go help at a meat market because he was a butcher. He was a Class A butcher, and there had been a strike in town with the union, and because my dad was a preacher, the people didn't give him any junk for crossing the picket line because they knew we needed the money, and so they left him alone. He crossed the picket line because he wasn't a part of the union, the meat cutters union. So he went to work for one of the grocery stores there and cut the meat for him during that time. Well, he told me, we've already talked to your dad, and your dad's in agreement with us. You need to stay away from the other kids for now, because we need to let this just die down, because there was a lot of excitement. And I'm like, okay. So I stayed for the few days. Camp was up. Got in the car, went home. And I was so angry. I was angry at them. I was angry at my dad. I couldn't believe my dad allowed that. And I didn't speak to him for probably save just the basic, I need something or whatever. I didn't need money because I was working by then and making my own money. But so I didn't speak to him much at all. And then everything went south with me from there. I ultimately did talk to the girl and her daddy, and because up to that point in time, they didn't know what happened. They still didn't know what went on, and nobody was telling him anything. He wasn't there, and they had convinced her it was a drug flashback, but she felt something was left out, something was different, and why was Ken there? Why was Ken there? So they had called me at work one afternoon and asked me would I tell them honestly what happened. And I asked him then, I said, do you really, really want to know? Because you don't know the grief I'm going to go through if I tell you. And he said, I've got to know, and so does she. And I said, then I'll tell you. Do you want to do this over the phone, or do y'all want to come down here to where we were at? And he said, can we see you tomorrow? We set a lunch appointment that next day, and I left work. He come met me at the work, and I sat down and I talked with him, and I told them what happened. He immediately went back home, resigned as a pastor of that denomination. And he was a very angry man, as well as he should have been, honestly. And I felt no remorse for telling him. I was probably I do feel remorse now that I was very bitter when I told him, and I was very angry, which probably didn't help his situation, because he still had to contend with all of this, and so did she. And when we get bitter like that, our problem is unless it's taken care of, that bitterness really just turns. It's like a cancer, and it just eats you up, and it eat me up. And then I wind up one Wednesday standing up to testify, and it was during the testimony service, and I stood up in the church, and everybody's eyes are on me, and I look at them all, and my head's turning, and I'm not saying anything for a minute. I'm just looking at them all, and then I finally just said these words. I said, "If you're the people that are going to be in heaven, I personally would just as soon go to hell." And I turned around and I walked out the door, and I didn't darken the doorsteps of another church for 8 years. I was 17 years old. I walked out. The next day I left home. Went to Arizona. That was where my girlfriend was from, and we wind up, I had gotten her pregnant, and we wind up getting married. And I, shortly after that, joined the military, and pulled almost an 8-year stint there, and got out. My marriage was in trouble by then. I had 2 children. Hoping that if I got out, I would save the marriage. That didn't work. My life was a shambles. I needed to go back home, and I knew it, and I did. And I went back to the church, and within a few months, I was singing again and loving the Lord, and I remember one day up there praying, and the pastor come over and laid his hands on my head, and he was praying, and he said something in this prayer. I'm not even going to repeat it because I'd have to explain it, and it'd be just adding a lot more time to this. But he prayed over me something that I thought, well, that was odd. Why would he pray that? And he was praying for a quote. It was a problem that I had, but unbeknownst to me, I didn't know I had this problem, and but it was a rumor that was going around, of course, and I found this out later when I was called into the office and accused of sleeping with a lady in the church, and I'm like, what? And naturally, she had a lot to lose in saying this, and since I was already separated and my wife was gone, I had nothing to lose, in lying, but she had everything to lose because she had a husband and everything like that. Well, this woman, I knew she would say anything to get her husband to pay her attention because he wasn't, and she simply used that for that, but they wouldn't hear that, and they started telling me, you gotta sit down, you're not gonna be able to sing, and we're not gonna be able to, you can't work with the youth, things like that, for a time until we determine, that everything's cool. And I said, well, but here's the problem with all that. I didn't do anything. But much like in my childhood, the accusation was there, the damage was done, you're toast, they're going to believe what they believe, and if it's you, good, if it's not you, then you're hosed, and I was hosed. And within a short time of coming back, I said, no, I'm not doing this mess again, I'm not doing this again. And I left again. And I was going for another season, and in between that time, I had my boys back with me. My wife, still my wife at that time, we hadn't divorced. We were still just separated. She couldn't handle them by herself. Come to find out, it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with she was having a baby from another guy that she was with, and this turned out to be, she'd already had one. This was a second. I didn't know. And shortly thereafter, she takes my boys back, now that I've gotten them through the rowdy years and gotten them back in order. She takes them back, and of course the courts allowed it. I had no say-so in it. This was at a time when the mother, unless she was crazy, she got the kids. And the thing of it is there was this thing called no fault divorce. I had no say so in that. So when I got served the papers, it wasn't to contest it. It was nothing like that. It was sign it because it's happening on this day, or don't sign it. It's happening on this day. So it happened on that day. We were divorced, and I wasn't hurt by the divorce. The hurt had healed for the most part by then. The separation caused some angst early on, but we were separated for several years, so the divorce wasn't horribly devastating. And in all honesty, if I would probably be lying if I didn't say I was just as glad to be over that now as anything else. I just was going to miss my boys, and I started clubbing again, and not for anything other than just it was a place to go after work. I didn't want to just come home and sit, so I would go to the club. I'd sit down and have a drink or two and talk to whoever was there, and then it got to be where I rarely ever came home because there was plenty of people to go home with, and I was working in a major furniture and appliance store. I was a manager of a big furniture appliance store here in Atlanta, and one of the girls at the store was having a birthday party, and she invited me. So I went, and it was there I met Kathy. Well, Kathy was pretty straight and narrow, especially compared to what I had grown used to at this point in time. So there was that fascination. She went to a little Methodist church, and so I'd go to church with her, and it was pretty safe. They didn't really get into nothing deep there, so I was comfortable there enough. It was boring, but I was comfortable enough to go with her. And within a few months, her and I got married, and we were going to church fairly regular, but I was just horribly bored out of my mind there. And, when you grew up in a Pentecostal church, going to a Methodist church is a shock to the system anyway. Plus, I just really had no desire to be around anybody that went to church. Church people just aggravated the snot out of me, so I didn't want nothing to do with them. So we sooner or later, I'm not going, and then I'm coming up with something to do on Sunday, so she's going to do it with me, and so I wind up pulling her out for the most part too. And to make a long story short, time goes by, not much more time, but I became incredibly sick. I mean, I was bad sick. Thought I was going to die sick. And to spare you the details of all of that, I had ulcerated colitis back in the 90s, or early 90s. They really hadn't contended with that much, didn't know much about it. But I had it, and I had it bad, and I thought I was for sure it was cancer. Knew I was dying. Made a bunch of promises to God, get me out of this, God, and man, I'll never. I promised Him everything. Well, He got me out of it, and me knowing what I knew, and I knew God. I didn't follow Him, but I knew Him. I didn't want to make Him angry with me and make it worse next time, because that was really, really, really bad. And so I went back to church, and I would go to church, but I really wasn't going to be a part of it. I didn't want to get close to people, because church people bite, Church people have really sharp teeth, and they have little weapons that they can shove in your back, and I was bound and determined I wasn't going to get involved with these people, because I wasn't getting hurt again. I wasn't getting accused of junk again. It not going to happen again. Well, there was a revival that they had going. It wasn't really a revival, but it was a special meeting. They had a gentleman by the name of Ron Kuzma, who was coming from South Africa, and he was making his rounds in the U.S., raising money for his missionary work up there. And our churches was one of the churches he would stop at when he came into the U.S. And he came by, and I was there every service. Every time the doors opened at the church, I was there because that was me fulfilling my promise to God. See, I'm going to be a good Christian. I'm gonna do the right thing, and I'm gonna quit drinking and cussing and hanging out with the bad people, and I'm going to go to church on Sundays, and I'm going to be a good little Christian. Well, by now there was some sarcasm there, but nevertheless, I was going to follow through with I was still playing, and this guy was preaching. He was preaching good now, and I was enjoying it. I was actually enjoying it. I was getting stuff from him, and he preached about several different topics. But then one night he said, I want to pray for all the men in the church. Well, I didn't consider myself a part of that church, so no harm, no foul. I set my behind down in that seat, and I wasn't going to budge. And I'm sitting there. All the men get up, and they go line up at the front of the church, and they go from one end of the altar, and they wrap around, and they're all the way to the other end. There's 50, 60 men there, and I'm the only man left sitting in the seat, but I was planted like a rock. Well, the pastor turned around and he looked at me and he said, "Ken, come on up here, brother. You're a part of this." And I was horrified. I was horrified. I'm like, oh, I was like a deer in the headlights, I'm like, oh, no. I don't want this guy to pray for me. I don't want this guy to pray for me. I don't want him to lay hands on me and pray for me. I don't want this. And I sat there with this look on my face, and he said, come on. So I got up, and I'm trying to think, what am I going to do? I don't want this guy to pray for me. So I saw where he was heading to start praying for people, and I said, well, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way around, because he's starting on the side where I was sitting, and I'm like, I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to sit on the other side, or stand on the other side at the altar where the other guys are, and by the time he works through all them men, he's just going to want to, humana, you can go now, and because he was going to be tired and ready to go. It didn't work out. I'd seen him pray for people throughout the week, and it wasn't uncommon for him to stop and give somebody a prophetic word. And I wasn't going to judge the guy. I didn't know him, didn't know much about him. So I figured a prophet, if he's truly speaking a prophetic word, it'll come to pass. If he's not, it won't. It was that simple. So no harm, no foul. I wasn't bothered by it at all. I grew up in the Pentecostal church. This was nothing unusual to me, and so I watching him go, and he's praying for people, and he ain't prophesying over a whole lot of folk, which I'm thinking, oh, okay, good, this is good. He's just going to breeze by. He said a few words over a few of the people, but then it was basically he just prayed for them, blessed them, he encouraged them, and he was done, and everybody was done, and he was moving through the line at a fairly good clip, and I'm pretty confident I'm going to get out of this. All right, the guy's going to come, lay hands on me, say a prayer, tell me, good boy, go get them, stay good, eat fish on Friday. I wasn't worried now, and then he got to me, and he put his hands on my shoulders, and he went to pray, and then he stopped, and he just looked at me. And I became mortified at that point in time. I knew what was coming. I knew, oh God, he's going to prophesy. He's fixing to say something. I'm caught. I'm busted. I'm so busted. I've been playing. And all this was running through my head like 1,000 miles an hour. I knew God was fixing to call me out. I knew he was fixing to bring down his wrath on me, man. I'd been playing games, and I'd been sick, and he got me out of it. And now it was my turn, and I was waiting. And the words that came out of that man's mouth were, my son, my son. Those were the first four words that come out of his mouth. I literally melted. I so needed to know for sure that God still loved me. I was at this little church, and the people there were wonderful. They showed us such love. The people I thought the world of in that church. Didn't hear a lot of preaching. It was back during the revival, Brownsville time, Brownsville revival time and stuff like that. There was a lot of worship and a lot of praying and a lot of all kind of stuff, but not a lot of preaching. And I was cool with that because it was the music was great and worship was great and I was enjoying that and I was not so unthrilled with the fact that there wasn't a whole lot of preaching going on. I'd heard it, I didn't want to hear it no more, and so I was having a marvelous time at the little church, but I really didn't feel a part of it. I didn't even feel a part of God anymore. I had been away from Him for so long, and I had grown so hard, and my heart was so hard, and I come back to Him because I was afraid I was going to die. Not even fear of God, not even fear of being wrong, or fear of the sin that I've lived in my life for the last years. It wasn't even that brought me back. It was just fear I was going to die, and so I made the promises with God. So in case it was God who got me out of that, I need to follow Him because I truly believed in Him, and I knew He was real. So I didn't want to anger God. So I took and did all of this, and I'm like, well, I've got a problem. I felt no connection with God. I didn't feel like He was even there, and the words "my son" literally melted me. And then he said a few more words telling me that the call that God placed on my life many years ago, and this man didn't know me from Adam. Nobody in the church knew about that because they didn't talk about it. But the call that I placed on your life when you were a young man, that call is still there. It's not going anywhere. All I'm waiting for you is to do what I told you to do then. And I just wept, and then I hit the floor. And I laid down there on that floor, face first, prostrate before God. I didn't even know what else to do. For hours I was there. And in the time I had a vision. I had a vision of me sitting on the seashore like Peter, and Christ Jesus standing across from me, and He said, "Ken, do you love me?" Yeah, Lord, I do love you. "Ken, do you love me?" "You know I love you, Lord." And then there was the whole, then feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And I understood in my heart and in my soul, and I understood the distress that Peter felt, because there sat the Savior of the world. There sat the Savior who went through all He went through for me, reaffirming His love for me and reaffirming His call and giving me that opportunity, like He did Peter on the seashore, to, even as much as I denied Him, like Peter denied Him 3 times, Jesus gave Peter the chance to reaffirm His love for him, and then He ended it with, "Follow me." And it was at that time He reaffirmed His call back into the ministry as an apostle. And like with me, it was his reaffirmation that my call was real. My call hasn't gone anywhere, and I was still to be doing what it is that God wanted me to do even back then as a boy. And I have not turned back since. I've gone through some stuff. I'm like Peter. I'm an impetuous person. I'm 100 miles an hour when I'm doing for somebody. When I worked in retail, that's the way I was. I was 100% sold out to what I did, and I was good at it. When I was in sports, I was 100% good at it. I worked at it. I lived it. I ate it. I breathed it. When I was young and singing, that's how I approached that, and I was good at it. When I was preaching before, that's how I was, and the invites never stopped. I was in a place to where I was, and when I was in sin, I was just as impetuous. I was very good at it, and I was 100% towards it. When I came back to the Lord, I that was it. This time I said, you know what? No matter what. And through it all, over the years, we've sold everything that we've had. I think this 3 times now, and we've gone off somewhere to do the ministry that He called us to do, or sent us to do. We've gone to big ministry. We've worked in big ministries, major worldwide ministries, with a lot of the talking heads that you see on television, on TBN and Daystar. We had them come, and we I've had to work with them, and wouldn't give a plug nickel for most of them, truth be told. But it was part that with the ministry I was with, that was part of the people who came in, and then when we worked with the little mission in Tennessee that had maybe 45 people in it, and did a lot of work in the community and a lot of work at that mission, gathering clothes, gathering food, feeding people, clothing people, things like that. That was one of the favorite times. And then we've been to Minnesota several times to help my father up there at his church. Over the years, we've done a lot of things. I've pastored churches, went to start churches, all this stuff we've done. And Jennifer came into our lives shortly after this time with my rededication, if you will, and I was pastoring a church in Forest Park. I was one of several pastors in the church. It was a black church, and the pastor had asked me to come. They wanted to break the mold of being an all-black church, and so we were going to be the start of that. And so, I'm impetuous. I'm kind of nuts. So that was just the thing for me. That was cool. So off we went, and that was such a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't trade it for nothing in the world. And from there, we went to start a church in Missouri, and then we come back to Atlanta, and through a series of events and time, we wind up in Minnesota. My father had moved and took a church up there. We went up there to help. I mean, we've been all over the place over the years, but I tied into the internet back in the 90s. It was 96 or 7, I think 97, or the late part of 96. But we tied into the internet, and I messed around with it, discovered chat rooms through Christian Community Network. It's now known as crosswalk.com, and doing some ministry on there, it turned into doing ministry work, which was kind of bizarre, but it's what it was. And then Crosswalk, well, they're still Christian Community Network then. We didn't change to Crosswalk until 1999, but they asked me to come on as staff. And I was the first known chaplain on the internet for a major Christian website back then. And then we changed the name to Crosswalk, and I was with Crosswalk for a few more. It was a little while longer. I don't remember exactly how long, but after they changed names, it wasn't too long. We had interviewed some of the big names in the Christian music, and the preachers and authors, and we had events with them, and we'd do interviews, and Crosswalk had grown immensely. It was part of the internet boom, and we were selling a lot of CDs and books and things like that. And then we had the ministry end of it, which was a chat room and the message boards, and I would get upwards to 1,000 emails a day from people. I had to have people work for me just to answer emails because there was more than I could handle, along with doing all of the other stuff. I seen things that would horrify you. I remember watching, I was able to be, because I was staff, I was able to be invisible in the chat rooms. I could be there and nobody knows I was there. And I was in a room one time, and the CEO of Crosswalk had called me on the phone. I was still living in Atlanta. Their offices were in Virginia. And I was talking to the CEO of Crosswalk, and I had it parked in a room, and there was only 2 people in there. It was obviously a guy and a girl, and They were just, typing in words of worship and praise and adoration to God. And when he called, I answered the phone, and I stopped going bouncing around rooms. I was just checking the rooms out and making sure everything was cool. And my eyes were on the screen, and I wasn't really even paying much attention to it, but it was there. And I was talking to the CEO of the company, and we were talking about some things. And then in my eye, I saw the words, and then they went on by. And then I said, "Hang on a minute, hang on a minute, hang on a minute." And I put the CEO. I made him hang on, and I grabbed my mouse and I pulled the screen down to look at. Did I just see what I saw? Because they were. I mean, I love you, Lord. You're magnificent, marvelous, great, mighty. Oh, praise your name. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Glory, 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 glory. And then it said, Joni crawls in your lap and licks your nipples. And they started to cybersex right in the middle of that. And after they went on for that for a few minutes, they went right back to the praise and worship. And I told the CEO, I said, I got a situation here. I'll call you later. I've got to go. I got to deal with this, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And by the time I'd hung up with him, I give him a brief explanation. And I hung up with him, and I'd look back down. They had done some more of the little worship stuff, and then they started the cyber section again, and then they went back to the worship. Well, I typed across the screen. The only way they knew I was there was when I typed. And come to find out, I searched their private messages and this, that, and the other, and he was and then I looked at their profiles, and she was a 16-year-old girl, he was a 35-year-old married man, and they were planning on meeting in Canada 2 days from that day in a hotel. So I was able to get a hold of the girl's mother, stop that from happening, but I witnessed something that blew my mind. I was familiar with the cyber sex. I knew people did it. I was familiar with all that. I knew it happened. I had counseled people that happened. That was part of the reason why by this time Jennifer had moved in with us, because that was a problem in her family, and she come and wind up living with us. All of this was going on, and this was the kind of thing that was happening in Christian chat rooms all across the internet. When I worked with Jesus Cafe, it was the same thing. When I started my own message board, I absolutely refused to do chat. Chat was a dangerous thing. But even via that, they had came out with the instant messenger thing, so they didn't need the chat rooms anymore. Now they could get on the little private instant messengers and have at it all they wanted to. It was the wild frontier, and people were utilizing it as such. It was an amazing thing to see. And I witnessed all of this over time. I talked to preachers that if I called their names, everybody here would know who I was talking about more than likely. Anybody listening to this would know. They're major names in the Christian ministry, in the Christian television and things like that. Men addicted to pornography and cyber sex. Men addicted to sex of all kind of crazy things, and men flirting online with women and whatnot like that, and then standing in the pulpits and acting like life was groovy. And I became to see the danger of this thing we call the internet. I saw the beauty in it. I mean, goodness gracious, information everywhere at our fingertips. You know, for the study of Scripture. Man, what a marvelous tool, because you could find anything, all the commentaries, word studies, this, that, and the other. We had access to all of this, and most of it was free, and it was insane, the possibilities. But then I started to see that bad side of it, and it wasn't long before I realized how prominent the bad side was and how weak the good side of it was, because the good side of it paled in comparison to the to the bad side of it. We were at a place to where we had we had a very small percentage of godly stuff on the internet compared to the horrific ungodly mess that was out there. We were just a bump. We were just a little bump. I am convinced. I tell people all the time I have a love-hate relationship with the internet, and that relationship hates it more than it loves it. But because of the good that, and because that it's a reality, it isn't going to go anywhere. We must be a light in a very, 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 very dark world, and cyberspace is a very, very dark place. And unfortunately, I see most of our Christian ministries out there. They're either they've got a website. Much of it is to push their wares. Much of it is to get people to give them an offering. Much of it is or if you're a church, it's just an information. It's like a yellow book, glorified Yellow Pages ad. This is our church. This is about us. This is who we are. These are the ministries that we have. Come join. And there's nothing about the gospel on there, or they have something little cheesy something on there. We'll have our statement of faith and this, that, and the other, but there's no ministry done on the internet. And because there's no ministry, people have taken to doing it themselves, and God bless them for it. But listen, reality check. There's a lot of nut bars out there saying a lot of freaky stuff, and now the internet is becoming church for many people, and there's so much weirdness out there that what we've done is we've lost a lot of people in the church because we bored them to death with our messages. We didn't answer their questions. Matter of fact, we didn't even allow them to ask questions. We were too busy talking ourselves. We didn't find out what they needed. We were too busy having our board meetings. We were too busy taking our time off, and because we had to have more family time. We were too busy having youth group meetings, singles meetings, this, that, and the other, where we never took time to deal with the people's questions that they have. And so they were able to go on the internet and ask somebody to answer these questions for them, and some wolf out there that didn't have to change into sheep clothing because with the internet they can't see them. They were able to get some poison into them, and that poison has spread throughout their body, and now they're just as big of a nut bar as that person was. And all the while, we kept using the internet for anything but ministry. Just like we did the television, and it got taken over. Just like we did with the radio, and it got taken over. And now with the radio and the television, it's mostly just an advertisement, infomercial style, where we have the guys going on and on and on, and buy my books, buy my latest. Here, send me this amount of money, and I'm going to send you this little necklace. Here, send me this amount of money, and I'm going to send you this book. Here, send me this amount of money. We spend more time hearing that on Christian TV than we hear the gospel. And so we got to get them pumped up because we got to make them feel good. So we sit there and we tell them you're pressed down, shaking up, running over. We tell them you're the head and not the tail. And if you give us seed faith offering of $58, you'll continue to be the head and never the tail, as if that's got anything to do with it. And the internet has become the same thing. It's become the tool for the same thing. Even little bitty guys out there, even nobodies out there are trying to be somebody. Even the nobodies out there are like on Twitter, for example, which I do a lot on. On Twitter, you see these young guys. They're out there promoting. They're looking at these big ministries, and they're trying to retweet these big ministers to get these big ministers to retweet them back and add them to their friend list, because that's going to give them some clout. And it's a big thing to have a huge following, but have a few followers. That makes you look good. So they've got all kind of gimmicks and all kind of things to elevate them above everybody else and put them in a place to where they are the man of God, and they say it often enough so that they begin to believe it, and then they begin to get other people to believe it, and all the while you have people out there listening to these people, and they're hearing these people, and they're following these people more than they're following you, Pastor, because you're too busy. You're too busy chasing after things that do not matter. And I'm running all over the place here, but I feel this in my heart that we've got to take this testimony and understand this Listen, the church has been a mess even since I was a little boy, and that was a long time ago. Now I'm 51 years old. And all we've done now is we've changed our tactic, but we're still the same mess. You still have the same mess going on. You're still ignoring people. You're still ignoring people. We've got kids out there. Read the research. Get on Barna and look it up. You've got kids out there. You know what? They don't care about what music you sing. They don't care if it's 3 songs in and out. That's not what's bothering them. What's bothering these kids out there is why don't we don't understand doctrine? We have no doctrine in us. We go to our schools, and our schools tell us that we're foolish for believing in this God stuff, and they tell us why we're foolish for believing this God stuff, and then we go back to our homes and we ask our parents, and so the answer we get from our parents and our pastor is, well, you just got to believe. Well, I do believe, but this is confusing me, Pastor, because what the school said is that the earth has been around for 20 million years, and that, well, no, it's only been 7,000 years, and that's it. You just got to believe. Well, yes, but all the scientific evidence points to the fact that, well, yeah, but you can't worry about science. Science is just it's all a lie, and it's just men thinking that men and men and men. But yet we send them off to the school day after day after day after day after day. We send them to school more than we send them to church. They sit under their school teachers more than they sit under their pastors. They sit under their school teachers more than they sit under their youth leaders. And then we wonder why our kids are a mess. Well, let me tell you why they are a mess. It's because we send them to Egypt every day. And then when we have them back in the camp, we're too busy trying to get them to conform to what we want them to conform to. We're too busy trying to get them to learn how to tithe. We're too busy to convince them, or to try to get them to turn into the little munchkins that we want them to turn into, so that they become twice the sons of hell as we become. We convince them that it's all about the money and it's not about anything else. It's all about, you want to get something from God, you're going to have to give something to God. We're teaching them all of this stuff, and the world's telling them, see, you're just buying into it. All they want is your money, and we prove it every time we have a church service, and that's what we spend most of our time talking about. And then they begin to doubt God. And then by the time they're 20, 21, 22 years old, they don't even believe in Him anymore. Some of the biggest atheist arguers you will see out there on Twitter, on Facebook, on the internet, are people who spent their life, kids who spent their life in church, who have grown up now. They're 22, 23, 24, 25 years old, and you ain't nobody going to convince them that there is a God anymore. And for what? Because we didn't do our job as a pastor. The internet is going to be the greatest tool that Satan's ever been able to get his fingers into and bringing down the body of Christ. Yes, I know the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. But will not prevail means it will not ultimately win. It will not win the war, but it's winning some battles. And it's taking our kids with them. And the internet is the biggest tool out there for them. But yet we remain quiet on the internet. Yet we have no real presence on the internet. You will spend millions and millions and millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars to be on the television, to sit there and convince people to buy your books and to buy your trinkets. And you won't spend but a few $1,000s on the internet, and none of that to minister. It's only to sell your wares, to tell them when the next meeting is, so they can all come to the next meeting. And you can fill your stadiums up with. All the while, we're losing these kids daily, day by day, kid by kid by kid by kid by kid, falls along the wayside, because we're too busy chasing after things that do not matter, and we're letting them die. I hate the internet. I hate it. It's destroying our families, and it's destroying our children. It is a reality, and we need people to minister on it. God knows we do. But you listening to this, if you're listening to this, hear me, hear me, hear me. Never let a day go by, never let an hour go by even, that you don't look up to God and ask Him to give you the discernment that you need to steer through this god-awful place called the World Wide Web. When your children are talking to you, don't just turn around on your computer and speak to them. Get off your computer and spend time with them. When your husband or your wife is talking with you, don't just turn from the computer and look at them. Because the messages you're telling them is that, listen, I'm doing something, sweetheart. Can't you see? I'm doing something. What do you want? And then they cut it short, see, because they don't want to disturb you. Turn it off and take the time necessary, whatever time that is, to deal with them. Whatever's on the internet can wait. You've got to make that a habit, because if you don't, it will turn into a bad habit. I could tell you story after story after story that would curl your hair. I hate the internet as a result of it. I have that love-hate relationship for it, y'all. But the hate is strong. It's a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous thing if we're not very, 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 very careful. But anyway, that's it. Y'all going to find out why this is the passion of mine, is the problem the internet has caused, and the problem that it's going to continue to cause. It's only going to get worse. We have them now on our telephones. We have them on our little tablets. We have them everywhere we go now. We can't get away from them anymore. They're everywhere, and they become such a part of our lives. And I assure you, I fully understand they're not going to go anywhere. And I assure you, I fully understand as a Christian, as a church, we need to use this means. It is a great way to contact other Christians. It's a great way to get the ministry, get the gospel message out there. It's a great way to even get messages to the church. It's a great way to bring about a revival in someone's life. But you have to be using it to do that thing. To get up there and to give a little sound bite, to throw out a little quip, to get a bunch of retweets, and to get a bunch of likes on your Facebook page, and to get a bunch of people to give them put out a link to your blog so you can have more page visits to your blog, and they can leave a note on your blog. All of that stuff is cool, but you know what? None of that matters. What's the message that you're giving them? Is there any depth to that message? Is this message going to not give them an attaboy, but is this message going to get them through life so they can get into eternity? Because everything we do needs to have an eternal focus on it, not a today focus. I don't need to give you a message that's going to make you feel good for today, that's going to last for 20 minutes until life smacks you in the face. I need a message that's going to help you get through this life so you can get into eternity with Christ. If I ever left anything with anybody in my testimony, I want to leave that. I have spent years, thousands and thousands of words typed out on message boards, in chat rooms, and on Twitter, and on Facebook. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of messages. Literally, y'all, literally. Trying to teach somebody something that's going to get them through this life and into eternity. Forget about the happy now and now. Because it's only for a blip in time. Make all your lessons eternal lessons, and you'll be blessed. On that note, I kind of rambled. I don't know why I went where I went. Somebody's going to listen to this, though, and it's going to make sense. I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to keep this. And you guys go out there, serve your King.